This is Clint Beaver, and he's going to give a little brief introduction, and then with much respect and appreciation and kindness, we're going to ask him questions so we can learn more about him and if he's a candidate that works best for you. He's starting here now at 7, so we need to be done by 8 o'clock. So we'll keep that in mind with our asking of questions. And with that, here's Clint. Thanks, Clint.
Thank you. I just left evening service at Sheridan Bible Church, and I told one of the members, I said, we're going to start out tonight with a few hymns. So if you'll take out the,
Okay.
I'm sure you're already warmed up. I'm going to ask your patience now. I'm getting over a cold, and so I may have to cough and sneeze and do all those things that people with colds do, and just please appreciate that. I wanted to be here tonight, and even though I am not in top shape, I'm here.
Oh, so we do appreciate it.
Thank you.
But I am the only remaining incumbent at this point that is running for re-election. And I did not particularly intend to run for re-election after my first term. So I want to start out and explain a little bit about why I ran originally, and then why am I running for a second term. I ran initially because of my professional background, my vocation as a Wyoming attorney, and my experience has been virtually all with local and state government in Wyoming, and dealing with various boards, county commissioners, state elected officials, and so forth. It just provided me with a body of experience that I felt really was suited very well to serving as an elected official in a board type of setting like city council. So I found myself in Sheridan. I'd only been here for a couple of years. I became aware that there was certain level of strife at that time on Sheridan City Council, and some folks that I visited with seemed to think that I might contribute positively to the mix. And so I ran 4 years ago. I was elected and have now served 3.5 years in that role. I think at least partly due to my presence, the temperature has been dialed down, and we get along pretty well on city council. When we disagree, we disagree agreeably with one another, and that's an improvement that I'm happy to report. So why am I running again? Well, with having served 3.5 years and come into interaction with a number of folks in the community and on the staff at the city, I had a number of those folks come to me and say, Clint, we hear you're not interested in running again. And I said, yeah, I'm kind of not interested in running again. They said, oh, please do. We really think that you bring a lot to the table. We want to see that continue. So I listened to counsel. It's one of those things I learned in church, and I decided that, well, God willing, I'll throw my hat in the ring, and we'll see if a second term is in order. So that led to my decision to run again, and people a lot of times will come up and ask you, I'm sure they've asked Andy 100 times, well, how's the campaign going? Well, I'm not a campaigner. I'm not a competitive person by nature. Many of my coaches would tell you that was to my fault, that I was not as more competitive in my nature. But I just leave it in God's hands how the results play out. I just bring forward information as to who I am, what I think I can contribute positively, and the voters will decide. You won't hear me say I'm the best candidate. Well, the voters are empowered to decide who the best candidates are. They're going to pick 3 of us. There's 6 in the running at this point, and that's for the voters to decide. So I handed out a little cheat sheet that I prepared for Third Thursday. Andy and I shared a booth there, and it just hit some of the highlights of my experience, both governmental and in the private sector. I think I'm most like to share the positions of the nonprofits, Homeschoolers of Wyoming. You may be familiar with. I served for 10 years on the board as treasurer of that group. We put on an annual convention, moved around the state, and then we lobbied in the legislature. Those were the 2 primary things that group did. Of course, they were affiliated with HSLDA, and had the opportunity to do a lot of interaction with that group, if you're familiar with that national organization. My children were competitive swimmers. Fortunately, their spirits were much more competitive than mine, and I came up through the ranks of officiating, and so for several years I was involved in the administration of the state group of Wyoming Swimming. So that was a great experience. And when I was quite a bit younger man, I was selected to be what in our denomination was called a ruling elder, and I've served for over 30 some years in that position. And so we've moved around the state and been involved in some different churches, but that same type of position. Currently, we are enjoying fellowship at the Sheridan Bible Church in the evenings and in the Sunday mornings in Gillette, a church that we had previously gone to before we moved to Sheridan. And so sometimes we double dip and get a morning in and an evening service. Familiar with this congregation because when we had to either brave the highways to go to Gillette or be smart and stay in Sheridan, this was our snow church. So we've worshiped here on snowy mornings. If you associate my presence with nice storm, that's why. So that's a little bit of background. I brought with me tonight, and afterwards, if you want to flip through a folder that contains a number of postings that I put on my website. So they're just printed out there, but would encourage you to go to the website, Clint for Council. Hopefully that's pretty easy to remember. And I've got cards that say that to help you remember if you want, or if you want to take some and pass them on to your friends. When I talk about my website, I have to get a plug. My daughter, Lindsay, set up the website for me because that'd be way above my understanding of technology. And so that is her effort to post things on the website is the only campaign donation that I accept. I appreciate her doing that for me. But my campaign is self-funded, and I printed those cards and the things that I handed out to you and some signs around town, and that's the extent of my campaign expenditures. I think it's certainly, some people find it interesting to look at candidates and see how much money do they spend on their campaign and where does that money come from, and so save you the trouble of looking that up. It's publicly available because we all file reports, but there it is in a nutshell. It's all funded. The things that I've written about and I've posted are issues that I have identified in my first term with council. And some of those issues may be things that you're aware of, and as soon as you start reading and go, oh yeah, I see what Clint's talking about, I understand why he would write about this. And others may be like, I didn't know this was an issue. So again, I'd encourage you to read. They're short, so if you start reading it, well, this was boring, well, it's over already. Well, I can turn to the next one, maybe it's more interesting. But I felt compelled to try to articulate some thoughts that I've had, some analysis that I do. If you've been to the other campaign forums that the chamber holds and other entities, traditionally, the format is such that it's very difficult to get anything of substance across to people. And I find that very frustrating. I suppose if you don't really have anything of substance to get across, then that's very reassuring because you can get through the forum without saying anything. But I like to be able to engage with people on a substantive basis. And so writing the post allows me to do that. Being a lawyer taught me to write briefly, because that's what the court wants, is they give it to us quick, so they're short. Yeah, when you have 30 seconds to give an answer in a forum, it's by definition going to be a pretty meaningless statement. You might as well go out and read the bumper sticker on a car or something. That's about how much information that's conveyed. So I kind of eschew those little sound bites, the labeling that you see typical in politics. Labeling isn't terribly helpful at all. I like to drill down. So when actually Andy contacted me about would I be willing to do this, I was thrilled, because the opportunity to have a format that isn't as rigid as what we're used to is a great blessing. And I hope it is to you too. It is from my perspective. I guess those were the main points. One thing that I guess I'd like to share before we do questions, and that is how do you approach the job? How are you going to do your job? How do you approach it? There's always different issues that are coming up. 4 years ago, you may remember the big issue in the community was fluoride in the water system. And everybody wanted to talk about that. And that was the issue du jour. Well, council dealt with that. There's no more water no more water in the fluoride, I was going to say. There's no more fluoride in the water. And so nobody's running up to me on the street and saying, Clint, what are you going to do about the fluoride situation? So those things come and go, and they're important for a time, and then they pass on. And then there's another issue that comes up. So I point that out because it's important, I think, when you make a selection for somebody to serve as your elected official for a 4-year term, to understand the issues of the day are probably going to be long forgotten in a year or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. So how somebody approaches issues generally is really more important for you to take into consideration. I approach things on a principle basis. Some people, obviously if you observe politics, they want to select the popular position. We talk about having their finger in the wind to see which way the wind's blowing. I just don't do that. And I have a certain set of principles that I apply in every issue that comes forward. So some of those principles, first of all, I swore an oath when I became a lawyer, an officer of the court, to uphold the law. The law is very important to me, and now I'm going to cough. Excuse me. And when you're functioning within government, whether it's city, county, your improvement and service district, state agencies, all of those entities are accountable under the law. They only exist because the legislature has passed a law to allow them to exist and has set out the parameters within which they can operate. And so I always want to evaluate any proposal that comes before council. Is this legal? Is this within our authority to do? It may be a wonderful idea, but wonderful idea isn't the principle that I apply. We start out with, is it legal for this entity, for the city of Sheridan to undertake this, to spend taxpayer money on it? Then, past that threshold, there's a number of other principles. Another one that I hold dear is that the ends do not justify the means. And we obviously see in our society today heavy disregard for that. Well, you know, it was worth it to get where we wanted to go. At the end of the day, we're better off, you know, even if it meant trampling on the rights of our citizens, even if it meant, you know, wasting money or whatever thing whatever means would be inappropriate, we'll just cast that aside because the end was worth it, and I don't believe that's appropriate. So when that brings me to a situation where the procedure with which council operates is very important to me, because procedure is essentially the means, right? We don't have a dictatorship. We have a democratic institution. Majority is going to rule. 4 votes on the council is a majority. And so within that framework, certain processes and procedures facilitate that so that we come ultimately to a decision that hopefully brings us to a good end, but we get there through good means. And again, sometimes people, you know, they're not concerned about the means of how you get there as long as you get there. And I don't. It's got to, the means itself has to be appropriate in my view. And then an issue that comes up an awful lot, and I see you're getting ready to leave. Thank you very much for the introduction.
Sorry.
And good luck with the little one there.
Thank you.
And that's, I have a few little clever cliches, but stay in your lane, play your position. There's a tendency in government, whether it's federal, state, local government, to simply expand and expand and expand. And that comes from internally, because I think our human nature is we want to feel like we're more important, and we should make decisions for other people and in other realms because, you know, we're just so smart, whatever. So it comes from that direction, and then it comes from the other side, and that's the public that comes and says, we recognize that there's a problem, and we see potentially government as the solution. And so there's that pressure to say, well, yes, we want to help. Nobody likes to say no, especially if the people asking ask very nicely. But the fact is that at some point you do have to say no, because otherwise you've just expanded beyond your authority and you're playing out of position. And for me, the way I like to describe that is when I was a kid, in school. One of my favorite activities in PE or whatever was playing volleyball. And everybody's probably had experience playing volleyball, and there's 6 of you on the side, and you've each got your spot, and then there's always that one player who's probably bigger, stronger, faster than the rest of you, and he's going to play all 6 positions, right? So he's going to jump in front of you and get the ball or block it or whatever, and you know that leads to a lot of strife and discontent and probably losing the effort. So there's a value in playing your own position and not getting into others. So I carry that same principle over into government. We have such a plethora of governmental organizations. And in Wyoming, it's less than it would be if we were in California or something. To talk about alphabet soup, all the different agencies and commissions that can be created. But just locally here, we have all kinds of special districts. We have city, county. We have the school board. We have the college board and so forth. And all of those entities, again, by statute, have a role to play. And there's really not designed to be overlap between those. Now, what we'll do sometimes is there's an issue, a need out there that is beneficial for a couple of these entities or more than 2 entities to join together as a team effort. That's great. We have what we call joint powers boards, where we team up together and solve problems that it's beneficial to join our forces on. But by and large, we each have our own role. And so, I'm familiar with some candidates for city positions that when asked, well, give us your priorities. And they'll say, well, I'm for, supporting education. Education is not the role of city government. If your top priority is education, then you should run for the school board, whose job it is to promote education, or the college board, but not the city. And I know that's just one of those things that sometimes people don't even think about. They're just, well, you guys are elected officials, so you should be able to solve this problem, whatever it is. So anyway, those are some of the principles that I apply when decisions come to me. The other aspect, and this is maybe not so much principle, but just by way of background, before I went to law school, my background was in natural sciences. And I've studied a number, I'm an expert in no sciences, but I've dabbled in many. And so the scientific method is something I'm familiar with, and I'm familiar with the concept of proving your case and supporting it with facts. So a lot of times people will come to the city and say, well, we want you to do such and such. And we're like, okay, and give us your, the supporting analysis from that. To the extent that people maybe are unprepared for that, or they bring contradictory information, that's not going to persuade me. If you want to persuade me, you're going to have to bring some solid facts and good analysis. So we get lots of reports. There's lots of reading, doing our homework before we make decisions, and I go through these reports like this, and I try it as best as I can. And I'm not an expert in every field, so sometimes it's a struggle. I have to ask a lot of questions, which I figure if I've got a question, the public has the same question, so we try to get that information out there in front of everybody when the presentations are done. But then just because it's on glossy paper and it has nice pictures, that's not persuasive to me. The substance needs to be there. All right, well, with that rather lengthy introduction, I want to take questions.
I'm gonna wait, but I guess I'm gonna go first. All right, good job, Clint, thank you. I've got a few questions, but I'm not gonna tackle them all at the same time. Figure let the room go around.
Sure.
Something I'm curious about since I've been here in Sheridan is, the folks elect council members, the 6 council members, and then they also elect a mayor. I have different views about that. Not necessarily sure that that's the healthiest way of putting a council or a board together. What are your views in how Sheridan has their council with 6 members at large and then the mayor?
Okay, I guess I'm not, I don't want to answer a non-question. What, is there something in contrast that comes to mind that you see there, or like how else would it be done?
Well, the way I'm used to it being done is because you have a 7-member council, the public votes in 7 members. The council then depicts the mayor or mayor pro tem, and that could be done on a rotational schedule. The way I've seen it done in the past is that rotational schedule is every other year. Mayor pro tem steps into the mayor's position, mayor steps down into the at-large position, and then it rotates, so that all members of the council have an opportunity to put their footprint, if you will, leave their footprint, I should say. You have thoughts on that?
Yeah, okay, thank you for your addendum there. There are forms of municipal government where all of the council level people, elected people are co-equal in terms of their authority. And that's done in conjunction with having a city manager in Wyoming government. And so there's tremendous authority, executive authority in the city manager. And you've got your 7, for example, elected officials, and they elect a mayor on a rotating basis, as you've described. And the reason that works and can work is because the mayor really is only vested with the authority of a chairman of a board, and so he exercises those authorities, but he's not granted any additional executive authority. The way the city of Sheridan is set up with what is sometimes called, this isn't a quote out of statute, it's just nomenclature that people use, as a strong mayor form, and it means the mayor actually has more executive authority. So in the Wyoming statutes, there's a whole list of authorities and responsibilities for an elected mayor. So when you all vote in Sheridan for mayor, which will be in 2 years, it will be up again, you're selecting that chief executive position and that authority. Now we have, you didn't ask this, but I can't help but lead into it. We have a city administrator that the council adopted in 2015, and so the authority that city administrator has was chopped out of the mayor's authority. And so while, again, the nomenclature would be that Sheridan has a strong mayor, well, he ain't as strong as he used to be. He's half the mayor that he was, just to pick a ratio, because those authorities are now vested in the city administrator. So those are 2 different setups of government, and that's why the to contrast the 2 examples you gave.
I'm asking this on behalf of Shannon, since she had to leave. But one of her questions is the city reliant on state and federal loan money, or is it possible for the city of Sheridan to sustain off of taxes collected locally?
All right, let me address the tax situation so everybody's got the background. Property taxes on your house, right? And when you register your vehicle, and there's that county tax item on there, which can be pretty pricey when you get a new vehicle, right? Those are ad valorem taxes. Those go and are distributed. If you look on your tax bill, there's all those different entities with so many mills on down the side. So you're funding county government, if you're in the city government, and then all those other districts. The biggest of which it's easy to find is the school district. It's a lot, and it's kind of chopped up into different categories, but they all go to Cheyenne. All that money goes to Cheyenne, and then the legislature does its thing on its allocation formula for student attendance and everything. So that's property tax. 8 mills of that comes to the city. That is not our biggest source of revenue. If it went away, I mean, it would be a blow, but it's not the biggest source. When you pay sales taxes, you have 4% that is identified as a state sales tax, but not all of that stays at the state. There's a percentage of that comes back to local government. So that's kind of a behind the scenes split that takes place. What's more obvious is the 1% optional taxes that people vote on here. Those do not pass through the state coffers. Those come directly to the city, county coffers. We have the general purpose, which is going to be voted on in this general election. General purpose meaning we can use it for anything we would use out of our general fund, spend out of our general fund. It can be operations, personnel, keep the lights on at City Hall, buy patrol vehicles, buy bullets for the police, pave the roads, whatever. Any municipal purpose. The other tax was the one we voted on 2 years ago, is the specific purpose. It's sometimes called the cap tax, capital tax, because it cannot be used for operations. It can only be used for capital projects. So that's, you gotta pave the streets, you gotta run the pipe, it's gotta be capital things. So those are actually very substantial in terms of the amount of revenue that comes to the city. Now, grants and loans. The state has passed through to local entities for a long time financial aid through grants and loans. I used to work when I was in Cheyenne in the Attorney General's office for what started out as called the Farm Loan Board, and then they changed the name in the early 90s to the State Loan and Investment Board. And they provide very low interest loans, very favorable interest loans to local governments, again, special districts and so forth. And then some other programs are just pure grants. Now, a lot of that money came from minerals. Coal bonus payments was one of the huge ones that we had. So I'm sure everybody in this room is aware the whole environment economically has changed in the state. We no longer get lots of money through federal leasing and so forth. That money is dried up and it's probably not going to come back. So some of those sources, traditional sources, are no longer there, but they've been replaced and currently with lots and lots of money that the federal government's appropriated under COVID relief legislation. Now that's theoretically one-time money, but so whenever you're working that type of grant into your budget, you better recognize that next year you're not going to have that money. It's just going to be a one-shot deal. So spend it accordingly. Could the city function without any state grants or loans? the city function without it would deliver much less in the way of services. Capital projects are incredible. Andy could give a better sense of this, but I'm just blown away at how much it costs to just like pave a street, a block of the street. And it just doesn't seem like there's any way on God's green earth that it should cost that much money, but it does. And so anything that involves laying pipe in the ground, pouring cement or asphalt is just phenomenally expensive. And local governments, without the opportunity to accept state grants and loans, probably would get very, very little of that done. And you would see a steady deterioration in the services that could be provided. This stuff doesn't last forever. It falls apart. We get one of the kind of interesting behind the scene things that I see as a councilman is whenever there's a leak, a water leak in town, they send out an email. We have a utility maintenance department. That's their thing. They're like a SWAT team that gets right out on the leak, fortunately, because otherwise streets are flooding, or maybe your basement's flooding, and they have this rapid response and we have a lot of leaks. And so we always want to know, all right, why is this pipe running down 11th Street keep breaking? Well, because it's 45 years old and its useful life was 30 years. And so we're living on borrowed time on infrastructure very commonly. So yeah, it does deteriorate, and the quality of our standard utility services will disintegrate over time. And we've been very blessed in Wyoming that we had that money. Not every state, has the minerals that we've had historically that has provided all the, look at any public school building in the state that was built with federal mineral money. And we're not going to have it in the future, but we've benefited from it in the past.
Thank you.
Next.
Okay, so we talked about taxes. I'm curious to know, being on for the last 3.5 years, what analysis has the city done to benefit, for there to be a need for the 2 1-cent, I believe the GPET monies that gets voted in by the public. I see that they put it on the ballot, but has there been any past analysis done to actually say we need that money? And I know you said it's general purpose, but would it benefit folks to know that if that money was required, that it had a specific use?
Okay, and again, I'm going to touch on both of those optional taxes because I think you need to appreciate both of them to get the full picture of what you're asking. So when we were putting together a proposal for the specific purpose tax 2 years ago, that was voted on 2 years ago, the city Public Works Department has got their list of projects that have come out of a multi-year planning process. There's looking down the road. When are we going to need to repave this street? When are we going to replace this power thing? And so they have no trouble finding a list. And then they know historically about how much money will be raised each year by that 1 cent tax, based just historically, looking at the trend. So what they've tried to do is shoot high, put a big number out there that it's essentially unreachable in terms of revenue, so that way the tax never runs out. I'm not sure if I can explain this well enough, but they don't want the full amount of the tax to ever be collected, because under the specific purpose tax, it drops off. As soon as if you say $80 million, and when the 80 millionth dollar is handed to Wendy's, it's done. And then you'd have to reenact another authorization for that. Well, they don't want that gap, because then the next dollar at Wendy's is not coming to the city or county. So it's kind of interesting how they do this. I'm going to contrast that with Campbell County, where I've worked in the past, where when they approached a specific purpose, it was for a certain project, like build something at the college. And it's going to be $5 million, and with $5 million of it, that's it. It went off. And your tax went back to 5% rather than the 6%. Sheridan County has not approached it that way. They have a different philosophy. And I'm not necessarily on board with this philosophy, but I'm just going to explain to you, this is the status quo. And that is, they always they never want that tax to be fully collected. So another opportunity for an election comes up while you're still collecting the last one. And so then you just piggyback on and it just never ends. Now, you all see the list of, excuse me, the list of projects that are funded by that. In contrast, the general purpose is for finite time, not dollars. So you authorize it for 4 years, you come back every 4 years. Whatever's collected in that 4 years is how much money the local entities have to work with. One of the things that I think I've been able to influence in my tenure is a rethinking of the approach on the general purpose. Because prior to my time on council, there was an approach that a pre-allocation for 4 years of those dollars to whatever uses they were going to go to would basically be put to the public and say, here it is, you vote for this tax, this is where these dollars are going to go. The problem with that is that I had with it is I come on to council after that, all that's transpired. I'm disenfranchised. The people who voted for me are disenfranchised because we do an annual budget and I've got people saying, well, you can't change that because this is the 4-year plan. I'm like, well, wait a minute, I don't get to say anything about how we're going to spend money for 4 years. I kind of thought that's why I got elected. So the budget is annual for the city, for the county. And we do not have to follow in the footsteps of what our predecessors said. And that, I've butted heads with people quite a bit on that because they like the way their paradigm worked. But I don't think that's a correct paradigm. I've written about that in my postings. It's called A Tale of Two Taxes. I try to be clever in the titles to suck you in, right? So, is there a need? The way I would answer that is just look at if the amount of GPET is the abbreviation we use, General Purpose Excise Tax, GPET, let's say $5 million a year. Well, if you just took $5 million out of the city budget, what effect would that have? Again, would this city dropping below white? No, but there would have to be cutbacks, and wherever those dollars have been going, would have to cut back to accommodate the drop in revenue. Now, the reality of drops in revenue is actually something that the city's been conscious of. When we stepped into the COVID times, we had no idea what was going to happen, right? If you remember back then, there was a lot of fear and trepidation in the country. Economy shutting down, businesses were closing. What's going to happen? What's the future going to look like? The year that we prepared our budget, when that hit, so that would have been the fiscal year 21, which is the last half of 20 and the first half of 21, we went across the board and reduced our budget, I believe, by 20-25% in anticipation of that may be what we were dealing with, is that type of drop in revenues. Fortunately, that didn't happen. Our revenues went up, actually, in Sheridan. Now, that was not a phenomenon that occurred statewide. There were portions of the state that really did get hit hard. We were better off than ever here. Again, because the bigger chunk coming from sales taxes, and people kept buying stuff. Amazon just kept delivering you stuff to your door and collecting taxes, and we were getting it, our sales tax. So we actually ended up being able to fully fund that cutback that we had prepared for. But I tell that because I want you to understand that it's not that people at the city are oblivious to the fact that money can go away. Because we thought very much that the money was going to go away 2 years ago when we were stepping into COVID.
I'm curious, you said you had, so when council meets and is voting on something, it's 4 votes, that is a majority?
Yes.
So what happens if not everybody's there? How does that work?
Well, it'd be a majority of
whoever's
those present.
Okay.
You need 4 for a quorum.
4 for a quorum, yeah.
Okay. Chapman?
So this tax money you're talking about, oh, I'm sorry, I thought my voice was loud enough. This tax money, does any of this get sent to any charitable organizations? Because it's my understanding that that's against the Wyoming Constitution. So like, are you giving money to the cat shelter, stuff like that?
Yes, the city has had in place a process of accepting applications from nonprofit groups specifically for this 1% tax, the 1% optional or GPEP. 2 years ago, I served on a committee with a couple other council people and some staff, and we revised the application process and the forms that were filled in, and tried to bring some accountability that there was concern that wasn't there. And by accountability, I mean, a group would come in and say, here's what we're going to do if you give us money. Well, then, do we know that they did that with the money or not? So in terms of submitting financial reports to show that they actually did what they said they were going to do, we beefed that up. Now, and again, part of that was my effort to get council to think in terms of this is a year-to-year process. This isn't a 4-year decision, okay? Now, this last year, I've been fighting to change the paradigm even further, and that is to stop partnering, which is a favorite political word, right? Sounds like who could be against partnering, right? Partnering with private groups. And I see a number of problems with that. One, you've already brought up, is the legal issue of the constitutionality of giving money to private groups. And I have voted against money going to certain groups just explicitly on that constitutional prohibition. Those would be groups that perform a wonderful community service, but it is not a municipal service under the law. And so when I identify those, I say foul, I'm voting against that. And it's no reflection on the people that do the wonderful things, but it's not a municipal function. Therefore, we shouldn't be funding it. There are other groups, and this is where it gets gray, is they're performing functions that are arguably a city function. And because government, and I'm sure this is not limited to Wyoming, but I've been in Wyoming for 40 years following these issues. And the buzzword for 40 years in Wyoming has been economic development, right? And we have state agencies that are all in on that. We now have the Wyoming Business Council, there's an agency created to consolidate all the economic development programs. Well, economic development is in the eye of the beholder. It can mean anything you want it to mean. And when it suits you to define it in a way that somebody gives you money, that's the way you define it, right? We have some organizations that we give money to that are in the economic development business. And I can see how some of their functions do fit that. That is a legal municipal function. It's not my favorite function, but it's in the statute. It's there. They can point to it and say, this is a legitimate function. So I think there'll always be some of these groups that sort of gray. To what extent is that group actually providing a municipal service, i.e. economic development, or not? And those are really tough ones because, if that's your favorite organization, you're going to view it through those glasses. I'll give you an example that came to us that had not been traditionally funded. So the advantage of when somebody comes in brand new, there isn't this history. That you don't already have these ties. It's a group called Uprising. I don't know if you've heard of that or not, but they're new in town. They've been here a couple years, and this very nice executive director lady came and made a presentation to us, and she started out in saying, well, we're new in town, we're a nonprofit, and we were told that nonprofits should always come to the city and ask for money. And you just want to kind of jump off the dais when you hear something like that. But she was being honest. I know there's no doubt that was the message that she heard from another group in the community. Oh, go ask the city. Their function is to make public aware of human trafficking, that issue in our society. That's a serious issue. And I wish them Godspeed in their mission. That is not a municipal purpose to create public awareness of human trafficking. So I voted against that. And so it's a recent example, so I bring that up. And I got outvoted, and they've been funded the last 2 years, and they'll probably continue to receive funding for that.
Try to capitalize on it. Okay. So here, I am having a hard time, and I get where your stance is, and I appreciate your stance because I think we're like-minded in that way. But the city council does represent the voice of the people, and if their voice is in violation of the state's constitution, then how is it that they're able to take our tax dollars, taxpayer monies, and be so free with it? And how does that keep getting, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but how does that keep happening over and over again?
Good question. To me, what you're raising is where's the accountability?
Yep.
And of course, the stock civics answer is the accountability is at election time. You get to vote in and vote out the people that hopefully are doing the right thing, but in your perspective, they're doing the right thing. But past the stock answer, the real nitty-gritty answer is people are held accountable by lawsuits in the court. there is not much in the way of litigation in Wyoming when it comes to city, county government, state government. There's only been a handful of litigation. A lot of it comes out of Jackson, which is in Teton County, which is pretty easy to figure out because they have like an attorney every square mile, and and lots of money, so they can either hire somebody or they can just do it themselves. So as you look through the cases in Wyoming, an awful lot of them are Teton County and town of Jackson cases. Kind of interesting. But statewide, generally speaking, you don't see much litigation. Why? Because it's expensive. If you're offended, you think that the Sheridan City Council has violated state law and the burden's on you to bring that lawsuit, you're going to sit there and go, all right, how strongly do I really feel about this? Strong enough to write a check with lots of zeros? Okay, so, I mean, that's a very practical reason why litigation doesn't happen. There has to be somebody that's damaged enough to feel that they want to spend the money to do that. I'll give you an example of litigation. Laramie County, which is where Cheyenne is, they kind of played fast and loose with their zoning regulations, and they got sued by a company that wanted to have a gravel pit. And when the case came out, everybody took note of it. In fact, the legislature even passed an amendment to the zoning law that basically said, hey, everybody, pay attention to what the court said here. What the court said wasn't at all novel. Anybody who was familiar with zoning law knew that Laramie County was violating it, and they got caught. They got called to accountability because of that lawsuit. So that's out there as an available remedy. It's a very difficult remedy to exercise because of the expense involved. But I'm just being frank with you because that gets people's attention. As you know, there's litigation against the school district going on right now. That's an example of people who felt strongly enough that they're willing to get their checkbook out and pursue that case. I can't really think, because I haven't been in Sheridan for a long time. There are some historical cases involving Sheridan, but I can't remember right now to give you an example that maybe you would be familiar with locally. But it's pretty rare to, what I often say is, we need more watchdogs. Like the federal level, we're familiar with Judicial Watch and all these various groups that keep an eye on the feds. We don't really have that much in the way of watchdog groups in the state or locally, but I think we benefit from them, even if you don't agree with them. If they're a group that they're a bunch of crackpots, just the fact that there's somebody looking to hold government accountable, I think is a good thing from my standards.
We are at the 8 o'clock hour. I don't know if that's on or not.
No, push
Yes,
this
switch it
button.
on.
There we go.
So unless you guys have a burning last question, we need to be respectful of Mr. Clint's time and our time. It's getting late and dark and I'm tired. But if there's any last little bit of statement you want to make, Clint, before we all close for the evening, you're welcome to.
No, I'm just thankful that my voice held out. I did not sing tonight in church just to try to save my voice for tonight. But again, thank you for coming and sticking it out, and hopefully some people will watch the video. And I'll stick around if you want to talk about anything individually. I've got nothing I need to rush back to. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Clint. Appreciate your time.